Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing another edition of The Good, the Bad, and the Smutty. And the idea behind this is it's actually part of a video series called A Fantasy Fan Reads that I have on this channel. As somebody who reads primarily fantasy, I kind of have to force myself to pick up other genres, which I do enjoy doing. One, because it just kind of expands the kinds of stories that I engage with, but also as a reviewer, I do think it highlights the things that make fantasy fantastic, but also the areas where fantasy maybe could learn from other genres. And as a reviewer, I think it also helps me analyze fantasy through a different lens. I also like the idea of doing deep dives into subgenres or sister genres of fantasy. So for example, I've done this for fantasy romance, and I will have an upcoming video about steampunk, and I'm really excited about that one because I've found a lot of books that I really like within the steampunk subgenre. But regardless, I have done a couple of videos now with an emphasis on contemporary romance stories, one of which was holiday romances. That one had one of my least favorite books that I have ever read. I spent, I think like 40 minutes, and I talked about a number of books. That video's really long, but I spent so much time talking about this one book because it had the most unbelievably insufferable characters in it who are so dumb. But anyway, that's not what today's about. Anytime I think about this book, I'm like, oh my gosh. I usually push it out of my brain, and then when I am reminded of it, I become incoherent and I just can't hit it. I start glitching. I've done one about holiday romances. I also did one where I took a lot of your recommendations. I just kind of checked out things that you had said, hey, check these out, I think you would like them, or I'm curious your thoughts on these. For today, I actually wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to explore the romances that have been put out by Book of the Month, because I thought it'd be kind of fun to reflect on the sorts of things that Book of the Month, whenever they have their curated selection, the things that they offer up, as these are the works that are coming out right now that a lot of romance readers might really enjoy. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of do a mini deep dive into those. And it turned out a lot of the romances I had already read were actually from Book of the Month. So we are going to be going through a list of those. Because there will be a number of books, I do still want to treat this similar to what I've done for the other videos and have little interludes where my adorable dog makes an appearance. So we will have some Luna Bear interludes within this. But before we jump into that, I do want to let you know the books that I've talked about in some of these other videos, so that if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on them, then you'll know where to go for them. For the holiday romances, One Day in December, Kiss Her Once for Me, The Holiday Swap, A Winter in New York, and In a Holidays. Those were the ones that I talked about there. And then for the other one, we have One Last Stop, Part of Your World, You Again, and The Rom-Commers. Just to clarify, I did also talk about other books within those. It's just that these are the ones that are specific to Book of the Month. So I could have talked about them here, but because I've already talked about them in depth in other places, I just figured that we would focus on the ones today that I haven't had the chance to go as in depth with. And those books would be The Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain, Beachread, Bringing Down the Duke, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, Yours Truly, Just for the Summer. Jumping into it, we'll go ahead and start with the two Ali Hazelwood books. The Love Hypothesis, I felt like it was one of those stories that it was inescapable. It seemed as though everybody, even people in my circle, people that read a lot of fantasy, it seemed like even they were picking up this book, and a lot of people were really liking it because there's such an emphasis on STEM within the story. And then there was the pendulum swing that went the other direction where everybody's like, what the heck is this? Why is everybody losing their mind about this book? And I kind of came into it after those two extremes had already started to emerge. And I kind of was like, I mean, it's fine. It was a little checkbox tropey where it felt like we're taking a collection of tropes, and as we're navigating the plot, it's like point A to point B is weird, meet cute, and it is a weird meet cute. She's like, oh boy, I don't want this person to like see me, what if I just like kiss this guy, which you're like, that's not, nobody should be doing that, but okay. So you have like weird meet cute, and then it's like, well, what if they like are pretending to date? And the reason for pretending to date is a little forced, and it's like, what if in order to prove that they're dating, she like sits on his lap and then everybody sees? And what if there's a scene where also it turns out he's shirtless and he's really hunky and buff? And it was like it was a lot of that. And I ironically don't remember the STEM aspects very well. I know she works in STEM, and I know he works in STEM, and I know they go to a conference at one point that's related to their field, but I don't know that I feel quite the same about. I mean, I respect that it had STEM aspects to it, and the author I know does have experience with this. So those aspects I'm not in any way trying to say were just kind of shoehorned in and weren't actually done well. It's just the other stuff is so bizarre that it was the bizarre stuff that stood out to me. So unfortunately, I don't really think but I should clarify, I am not in STEM, if you didn't know. So I think it's fair for other people who are in STEM to have those things be very meaningful, and I think it makes more sense that they might retain the memories of those moments more than someone like myself. If I picked up a book and there was a lot of emphasis on music and it was really well done, then I'm gonna be like, yeah, these parts are really, really meaningful to me. And if somebody else is like, yeah, but like the meet cute was weird, I'd be like, yeah, but the music though. I can completely understand why some people that would be a pretty big focus for why they liked it. But I kind of came away from it like, I don't think I hate it like some people hate it, but I also don't think I love it like some people love it. And that leads us to Love on the Brain. This one, I enjoyed the story for the most part more. It gets really intense. I'm pretty sure somebody tries to kill somebody. It was a lot, but I found that it wasn't quite as ridiculous as the Love Hypothesis for the most part. I remember actually liking this one a little bit more. However, this one has a scene in it that has forever been cemented in my brain. And it's a little explicit, so I'm going to try to be very PG because I want to ensure that if you're somebody who has my videos playing when, your kids are around or something like that, they're not like, what? So I don't want to scar any young minds. But after a certain act that resulted in something being in our main character's mouth, the man, I guess, he thinks it's kind of sexy. He wants to see the evidence, so he like grabs her face and he's like, open your mouth, let me see it. And I've mentioned this before, but it always reminds me of when your dog eats something that they're not supposed to, but it's not gone into their stomach just yet. It's still like in their mouth, and you're like, no, and you're trying to pry open their jaws, but suddenly your dog is clinging to whatever this stupid thing is within an inch of their lives, and you're like, no, stop it, please, just get that out of your mouth. I don't want you to die or to need to have surgery because you won't open your stupid mouth. So the idea of that scene, the way it was written, I was like, ugh, it reminds me, if you've had a dog, I feel like that's what it's like. So that's the thing that stood out to me the most about that one. I'm going to kind of talk about both of these with each other. I don't think that the works that I have read, these two, by this author, have really hit in the same ways that I think other contemporary stories can. It really just feels like ridiculous shenanigans, which there is a place for stories with ridiculous shenanigans, and sometimes it can be really entertaining and fun. I think that certainly as a fantasy reader, there are some stories that it's just about the fun and the action and the fast pace, and in those stories you're not hitting on some of the deeper themes. You're not exploring how societies fail us or how societies could be better through the lens of fantasy. You're not doing that. You're just following this campy fun adventure. And it's okay that there are versions of that within other genres. And I kind of think, personally, for me, that that's what these have been. I'll mention Yours Truly and Just for the Summer now. These two stories, both for me, were kind of the opposite of what I was describing about the Ali Hazelwood books that I've picked up, in that these definitely certainly still fulfill a lot of the things that I think people are wanting and craving out of their contemporary romance stories. And then they take that extra additional step to explore some really, really heavy things that a lot of people have, unfortunately, a connection to. And I say unfortunately because, of course, no, you don't want people to have to experience hardships in life. But the fact of the matter is that it is a part of life, and a lot of people have experienced the things that are touched on in this story. So for me, I think that took it above where it kind of turned more into just a story that bordered on almost literary fiction, but there is this sort of hug, this comfort that you get when you're like, I know this is going to work out in some ways. I don't know that it's going to work out in every way, but in a sense that can be something that is very comforting as a reader, because it is reminiscent of things in our own life. Certain things are going to work out, certain things won't, certain things you'll never really get great resolution with. And I do feel like both of these books had that present. One of them is exploring the ways that the trauma of somebody hurting you in your life in a romantic setting, how that can have lasting effects on you in the future, as well as somebody who has pretty extreme social anxiety, and I did appreciate that. But the additional factor with the one person who was very hurt and betrayed by somebody, there are other things that are very, very heavy that I can't really talk about because it happens later in the story, and it does end up kind of being something that's a reveal, but just know that it does explore some very difficult and traumatic things in those regards. And then the other one is a lot of emphasis on patterns of manipulation, abuse, suffering, and you specifically see that between a mother and her daughter, the mother being very neglectful and the daughter always trying to be understanding of the fact that her mother had difficult circumstances. So she tries to be forgiving of her, but it just keeps getting worse and worse. And the main character ends up sometimes perpetuating the very behaviors that her mother inflicted upon her. And so by having these things be such a focus, I really appreciated it. And I liked the romances in both of these. I thought that the man in Yours Truly was adorable. And I also thought that the way that the two characters are quite different from each other, because he's this precious, I just thought he was so cute. And then she is this very vulgar, over the top, I'm loud and I make a lot of jokes, and the two of them together I thought actually really complemented each other well. On paper, a lot of times when people say in trope marketing and things like opposites attract, sometimes it doesn't actually work. Like, you just have these two personalities and we just have to accept that they mesh well together. But in this, I actually felt like we saw the ways that they complemented each other. And then in the other story, I thought the characters were really supportive of one another. They cared about each other. They both felt like real likable people. And I appreciated that not only did we have the familial aspects and the trauma that we're dissecting, but we also had lovely romances.
Luna with her new toy. So peaceful. Almost.
Bringing Down the Duke was not my favorite. This one, you're following a historical romance setting, and I'm not opposed to that. I think that can be written really well, but the idea is that you are looking at a woman in a time where women don't necessarily have the amount of rights that they deserve and that they should just have, and so they're kind of fighting for that. And then you have a man who is in a position of power, and he doesn't try. I mean, I'm not going to have a whole lot to say about this other than he doesn't try hard enough, in my opinion. I don't know how I would be attracted to somebody who's not trying that hard, even though they have a position of power. They try a little, but I'm like, hey, can you try a little more? It's hard to be attracted to you when you don't care about people's rights. So that just made it a little harder to buy in. I think it could have been done in a way that I could get on board with if he had been more likable. I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to. He sometimes also has this sort of expectant quality to him, and I'm like, well, I don't really like this. And then the last two, we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and Beachread. Obviously, these are by two different authors, Talia Hibbert and Emily Henry. Beachread is actually my least favorite Emily Henry book that I have picked up, as I didn't really find myself very invested in the plot, and I also felt like typically Emily Henry does a pretty good job of doing what I described about the Abby Jimenez books, showcasing the ways in which life can really be challenging and how we persevere through those challenges. I find that Emily Henry can do that quite well, but I felt like Beachread, it was more surface level than maybe some of the other stories in this. And other people feel very differently from one Emily Henry book to the next. So I'd be interested to know which Emily Henry book has been your favorite or least favorite if you have read a lot of them. But in this, you have a character who writes. They're both writers, and they both don't necessarily respect each other's crafts because they write in different genres. So the story is that they're going to force themselves to try and write each other's, and there's kind of this competitive angle of, I think that mine is actually harder to write than yours. And they discover more about each other's crafts and each other as individuals as they're doing this. And some of the things that transpire in the book, I felt it was odd because it's a contemporary setting, but in fantasy, this happens sometimes in fantasy books. Characters will end up in places and they'll be doing something for quest purposes. And there's a tiny bit of like, sometimes you sit there and you have to remind yourself like, why are we here again? And I don't know that I've ever had that feeling in a contemporary story, but sometimes the characters would be doing things specifically because she's teaching him that in order to portray things realistically, you have to experience them. So she's trying to explain to him, as somebody who writes contemporary stories, I have to go and experience a lot of things so that I can write it in a way that actually feels genuine. So they go places sometimes, but some of the decisions of where they're going to go, I'm like, it was just kind of an odd choice. Like, we end up in some weird places and some weird areas. And I like the idea of these two rival writers trying to understand each other's genres a little bit better. I liked the concept. I just felt like we didn't quite dive as deep into it. And it wasn't as fun either. It could have been really fun. And I didn't really find that it settled into either of those. For me, anyway. And then Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I do think that this author is really funny and I think really charming and can write really quirky but likable characters. But I always have found I've read 4 Talia Hibbert books at this point, and they always lean a little bit more on the lust factor and the characters just really having the hots for each other. And they do explore, the Brown sisters, these 3 books do explore very realistic things. So I don't want to try and portray it as it is only focused on the characters being attracted to each other. Because in the case of Get a Life, Chloe Brown, she is somebody who has chronic pain, and she has to deal with people oftentimes not believing her because it's not something that's just easy to prove, and it's not something people can really see. And thus, she has to kind of always not only prove herself to people in her life, her family, but also she has to remind herself that it's okay that she has to move through life differently than other people. I did like that character and the love interest quite a bit. I actually just wish we had kind of sat in those things a little bit more and then had it be maybe more like 50-50, the development of the relationship and the exploration of those aspects. And I do feel like we spent a little bit more time on the romance side of things. And part of why I like romances that do really spend the time on the other aspects that are in them. I'm not just talking about Chloe Brown at this point. I'm just talking about a lot of what I've touched on today. I like those things because it really shows how romances in our lives are something that take a lot of work because we don't have the time to just drop everything and focus on the development of this relationship. We also all carry trauma. We all carry things in ourselves that make it so that it affects how we show up for the people that we are in relationships with. So I like when all those things come together, and stories that are just about the fun and the silliness and falling in love, those can be really cute and heartwarming, and sometimes we really just need that kind of a story to lift us up and make us feel happy. But I like the ones that really do it all, basically. And of all of these, I will say that I think Yours Truly and Just for the Summer accomplish those the best. The Love Hypothesis, Love on the Brain, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, I think those ones were a little bit more on the fun side. I think Emily Henry has a tendency to lean a little bit more in the Abby Jimenez style, but I don't know that I think Beachread is the best one to showcase that. And then Bringing Down the Duke, I might need more experience with historical romance, maybe, to I don't know. I just really didn't like the guy, so I think it's hard for me to think of that one as fairly, because in my head I'm like, well, whatever. And I just don't even want to take the time, even though he's fictional. I'm like, try harder. But those would be some overview thoughts of a number of the contemporary romance stories that I have picked up, and a historical romance story that I've picked up through Book of the Month. As noted, I mentioned all those other ones that I have picked up through Book of the Month and talked about in depth in other videos, so I'll have those linked. But I'm very curious, what's been your favorite contemporary romance book you've ever read? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.